$100 billion with no meaningful results whatsoever. $100 billion. It's a shocking number, and yet no results. No results. In fact, we saw, the Environment Commissioner in a 2023 fall report said, and I'll quote, the report painted a grim picture of emissions reductions in Canada over the past 20 years, saying that the only significant drop in emissions came during the 2008 financial crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic, which had little to do with emissions reduction policy. So in the midst of the pandemic, when we were all forced to stay home for weeks, not drive, not travel, not do anything, not really leave our houses or see anybody, that's what emissions dropped. There was no other meaningful emissions drop in this country since the Liberals have been in office. And in fact, the Environment Commissioner went on to say Canada is the only G7 country that has not achieved any emissions reductions since 1990. Wow, $100 billion and no results. From the Office of the Auditor General, she said Canada's greenhouse gas emissions have increased since the Paris Agreement was signed, making it, quote, the worst performing of all G7 nations since the 2015 Conference of the Parties in Paris, France. That was in 2021. So we're seeing all this money just flying out the door. And in fact, they brought forward something called the Net Zero Accelerator Fund. And what I found really interesting about this is they propose $8 billion. Again, just billions are just nothing to Liberals. Doesn't matter how long and how hard Canadians had to work to produce all those federal income taxes. But whatever, they're going to spend billions like it's chump change in the bottom of their pocket. So $8 billion towards this Net Zero Accelerator Fund. And what's really interesting about this is they found that there was no accountability really on the money to reduce emissions. So they're just throwing billions of dollars to various companies with no measurables. Nothing to show the public, well, we gave them this and they committed that they would help lower emissions at this regard, and we'll hold them accountable to that commitment for making their companies billions of dollars from the taxpayer. That lack of accountability is seen across government departments here. In fact, the government makes, this government in particular, the Liberal government, makes all these big financial announcements. Doesn't matter that we've doubled the national debt from $500 billion to well over $1 trillion in 9 years, almost 150 years of prime ministers. All their debt was done in less than 9 years by Liberal government. And they talk about all these billions, and yet, of course, there doesn't seem to be really any measurables. It's like a ribbon cutting and announcing all these billions, and then that's all we have to do. It's not really about what the actual impact of those dollars are. It's as if they think success is measured by how much money you spend, not by the outcome it produces. And that's what we're seeing with a lot of this so-called green spending. And in fact, in some cases, the government didn't know if the accelerator fund provided would lead to any emissions reduction. In fact, the Environment Commissioner Environment Committee said themselves, quote, we also found that the department did not always know what extent GHG emissions have been reduced by those companies that took part in the Net Zero Accelerator Initiative, or whether the funding provided would lead to reduced emissions. So again, how could you just disregard the hard work it took for Canadians to provide that money to the federal government and just throw it out the window with no follow through over and over and over again? So then it's not just on the greenhouse gas emissions that we're not seeing any meaningful action, despite nearly $100 billion apparently, according to them, spent. It's all different departments.